Now I'm going to paint the shadow side of this face. Really looking at this photograph very carefully, I can see that the reflected light color up here in his forehead has got a lot of blues in it. It's really a pretty, almost cerulean blue. Then down here I can see the yellow reflected light off of his shirt. But the first important thing to do is to get this 40% value difference between the sunlit and the shadow side. So since the shadow side of any object is the same color as the object upon which it is cast, I have to make a darker orange to do this shadow side. After the skin color has dried, I'm checking to see what value it is on my little value scale here, and it looks to me like it's very close to value 2. So that means I have to leave 3 values in the middle, and my value for the shadow side has to be clear down here at value 6. And because I don't want to try it out here on my painting, I'm going to mix up some colors and try it over here on this piece of scratch watercolor paper. The colors down here I'm going to make slightly warmer than the ones up here in the forehead. So I'm mixing up alizarin crimson, touch of permanent rose, and some raw sienna. I'm going to put in some burnt sienna because it's a darker orange. It's orange with black in it. And I'm going to try this for value. Here I've just painted it on the side of my board here. It's awfully hard to tell the value when the paint is still wet, but I'm going to put it here next to the 5 and see if it looks darker to me. It looks slightly darker. I'm squinting my eyes because by squinting your eyes you can get much of the light out of view, and you can see the relationship a little better. Just to be safe, I'm going to gray this color slightly. And to gray the color, I'm going to touch just a tiny bit of green. I'm just graying it slightly. Okay, I'm very sure it looks darker here, so I'm going to use, that would be the color for down here, and then I'm going to add possibly a little more permanent rose to it to cool the color. So let's start out by putting the shadow shape down his cheek. I'm going to go right around this cheek here, into here, comes down across here, comes across his nose, down here, and it's going to go right over his teeth, over the lip. And notice I'm using plenty of water and putting this color in very rapidly. The point is you want to keep this wet. Use a brush large enough that you're sure that you can keep it wet. Now I'm going to clean out my brush, get into the yellow, and just put yellow for reflected light along that edge. And I'm going to daub some yellow right under the nostril because I saw it there, right here. Okay. Now I'm going to slightly cool this color as I go up into the forehead area. And it's going to go over the eye, down here, across the nose, right over his eye, into here, and it goes up along this part here. But here again, I'm going to throw in some reflected light. And this time, I think I'm going to try some cerulean. I'll just put some cerulean blue up there for fun. Okay, now it's time to soften these edges. I'm using a little larger brush to soften these edges because I think it would be easier. I'm going to turn my drawing around so that I can get a better position. Okay, now I'm going to check for value. It's slightly darker than value 5 here, so right into here. And remember, the dark has to be where the sunlit and the shadow side meet. Reflected light is just that, it's light. So this part over here can be lighter, but as long as where the sunlit and shadow side meet is a full 40%, you're fine. Don't ever go back into what you've painted unless it's wet. It has to be thoroughly wet or thoroughly dry before you go back. Otherwise, you're going to get a bloom. Well, the next thing I have to paint is the shadow shape over this eye. So this shadow shape seems to come down here, goes across the eyebrow, across here like this, comes down into the eye, then it goes across the eye, around here like that. Okay, back now to the warmer color for the lower lip, for the shadow shape around this. I'm going to put in the cast shadow first here, comes around here this way. Then I'm going to throw in the reflected light next on the edge of the cheek and soften the edge. Well, while this part up here is drying, gives me an opportunity to paint the shirt. I'm using a fairly large brush and I'm going to paint that with a light coat of New Gamboge. So come along here. Probably could use a little more color than that. I don't want to forget to put the cast shadow in his ear. Ears are generally warm in color temperature. And I want to be sure that I get the ears are important because everybody's ears is somewhat different from the next person, so I'm going to be very careful using a smaller brush and trying to get this shape right. There is always a little bit of reflected light under the bottom of the ear because it's right above this shirt, so it's going to get a little yellow right here on the bottom. And then I'll put the darker right here where the bottom of the ear turns under. Soften that edge. Put a cast shadow onto his neck from the ear. Now for the cast shadow on his neck. Necks are generally cool in color temperature, but I noticed that right here, his chin starts right there, and so there is a shadow right here. So what I'm going to do is use the shadow shape and pull it up around the bottom of his chin and soften that edge, which will then become the area that's turned from the light. First thing, I'll put in the reflected light under his chin. I'll put that in first, and then I'll get into this darker value and just charge it right along the bottom of his chin and pull it right on up into here. And then soften the edge. I just want to go a little darker right on that edge. There. I really need to make that edge soft, so I'm just going to use a big enough brush that I can pull it out. The shirt is about dry, so I can put the cast shadow in. And I'm going to add a cast shadow from the shirt onto his neck because that will help define the edge of the shirt. Okay, here comes the cast shadow onto his neck. Now this is a cast shadow on a relatively flat surface, so I'm going to keep the edge pretty hard. Pull it up into there. Stop at the edge of the shirt. And I'll add some more cerulean blue because I think that would be nice right there because it's a cool color. It gives some different color into our painting. Makes it a little bit darker right in here. Then we'll put the cast shadow that I moved around his shirt. It's going to come around his neck down here. Now the cast shadow on yellow is always a problem because yellow is so light in value right out of the tube that it's difficult to get a dark yellow. You usually have to go either toward red or toward green because it's at the top of the color wheel. In this case, I'm going to go toward red, and I'm adding to my New Gamboge some quinacridone gold and some burnt sienna. And I'm going to just bring that shadow shape down, right down his collar. This is really, really very subtle, but you might want to notice. The color comes down off his nostril, over and down and around. And I notice that I haven't been careful with that. So I'm going to pull this color into his nostril. Then it's going to come down out of the nostril and over into here before it starts down and around. After this first shadow shape is completely dry, it's always a good idea to check for value to be sure that you're where you want to be. because without this value change, I can't legitimately put in this reflected light. And I like to have that light because I think it adds so much to any painting, especially of a young person.